In this video, we're going to work on the frame and the fork for the wheel that we completed in the last video. I'm going to use the fork off of what's left of this bike, and obviously the first thing we need to do is extend it so that the arms will be long enough to reach the center of this. To make this fork work, we're going to have to increase the length by about 18 inches. And I was kind of hoping that we would be able to get 18 inches of straight pipe off of this section here, but that's not happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the pipe, going to weld it, and then heat it with an acetylene torch, and we'll have to straighten it out. Just got a little bit more complex than I was hoping it would. Well, by heating this area with the acetylene torch and then sticking that piece of conduit in there, I was able to straighten these out. They came out pretty straight. So actually quite a bit straighter than I expected they would. So this one's got just a tiny bit of wiggle there. You can see it opens up there. That's like maybe it's not even an eighth of an inch. So pretty happy with how that came out, actually. So my friend gave me this piece of steel, this huge hunk here, which I believe is a ballast out of a treadmill or something of that nature, and it has these half slots cut in it, and as it turns out, makes a perfect guide to fixture this piece for welding. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and weld these onto the forks, and the plan is to weld those both on, take a measurement, bend this end straight as needed, and then I'll go ahead and weld the bottom end of the fork back on here, which should make it long enough. So I got my extensions welded on, and I tried something a little bit different this time. I tried to get my welds as, well penetrated and reasonably flush with not too much prod standing up. But then what I did is just using a flap disc, I just tried to sand the prod parts of the welds down, and I ended up with a few little holes and stuff. And instead of just keep on sanding down so everything was smooth, went ahead and filled those spots up with a little more weld, and then sanded again. And I think that I got a reasonably nice finish, and I hope that I didn't sand everything so thin that I got a weak spot there, but I don't think so. So I think we got some pretty good results here. So using the acetylene torch, able to get the rest of these pipes fairly straight, put a straight edge up against them, and there's some gaps, maybe about an eighth of an inch gaps in different spots. So it's not exactly perfect. If you look very carefully right here, it's easier to spot by eye than on the camera, I guess. But you can see that there's a little kink there, but it's pretty close actually. So, and the weld's pretty good. So I think that, I think I'm going to have some sort of a textured paint. I think I'm going to go with like a truck bed liner or something like that, like Rust-Oleum makes. That's what I'm going to use to paint these. So those little details aren't going to exactly jump out at you. So I want to reduce the gap that I try to fill with weld here. So I'm trying an idea that I kind of come up with here. And what I've done is I've clamped the fork and the other piece of this fork I want to weld together on this board right along the edge. And it's clearly showing, that I need to take just a little bit more material off here. So I'm going to continue to grind it until it meets up with everything the way that I need it to be, and see how that works out. So between trying to line it up with that piece of wood and this piece of steel, I've got this gap pretty minimal. Now the real challenge today is going to be keeping this gap small while also keeping this oriented, and then also with the other side of the fork keeping that oriented and equal length to that fork. So I've got this this junk wheel that I'm going to use to help with that, but I think that this is going to be a bit of a challenge. I'm going to go ahead and get started by tacking just in one or two spots right here. So at least I've got something that that's solid, or at least semi-solid. So I've got one side of the fork here tacked with a nice joint, and the forks are lined up here on this side fairly well, and then also I've got everything lined up using this this junk wheel. So I think that I'll feel pretty comfortable making a cut here. So I've been trying different methods to try to get a perpendicular cut on the tubing here, mostly by lining up a square. I'm going to try something else because it seems like everything I do I end up with kind of a crooked cut. So if I can get a good cut to start with, then you know, then maybe things will be a little bit easier here. I'm going to try this masking tape as a guide. Let's see how this works. So using this tape, I think that I've gotten pretty good results, with the exception that I decided I'd like to cut it maybe just a little bit on the long side, because it's always easier to cut a little more off than try to add more on. But I went to the wrong side. That was pretty dumb. So anyway, I can fill that in with the welder, not a big problem. But if I look at the way that the wheel sits in here, it's definitely more towards my hand on that side than it is on the other side of the fork, which would indicate that this fork on this side is too long. So I go ahead and shorten that a little bit. I'm getting really close here. The gap is really small on this side. It's touching on the inside, and the wheel is hanging a little bit towards this side yet. So, but you know, by using the tape, I was definitely able to get a much better cut around that tube. A lot less grinding, cut closer to right the first time. So I think that if I just grind a little bit off the inside edge here, that I might even be where I need to be here. So I got the other side tacked here, got my gap really small, and just as I got that side tacked, my standards went up on the other side a lot. The material doesn't quite line up here. So I'm going to go ahead and break that tack, line up the material a little bit better, and re-tack. Well, I got both sides tacked, and I think I've got this wheel to my satisfaction. But before I complete these welds, then I'm going to go ahead and stick it on the target wheel, the big wheel, and also take some more measurements to make sure that both these are the same length, that one doesn't like stick out at a funny angle compared to the other, all that type of thing. The fork needs to be really good. So anyway, go ahead and take my measurements and complete the weld, and if everything works out as I'm hoping, then the fork should be complete. So my measurements outside kind of showed this to be reasonable. They were rather crude, I have to admit, but when I stick it on here, clearly the fork touches this end of the wheel, so we're still a little bit long on this side, so we'll have to take care of that a bit. Also, when I get a straight edge on this side of the fork, pretty flat along there, except for this little spot here where I get a little bit of a wiggle, but we knew about that before. However, here, while the fork is flatter up until this spot, it's clear that that the end is bent away here. So this might be our chance to fix that at the same time. I was going to worry about it. Just looking at it, you can't really tell. But since we got to shorten it a little bit anyway, might as well take a little bit of a pie cut out and make this fork a little straighter. So I've made my adjustments, got my tack on here, and I'll recheck against the big wheel. So one thing I've got to say though is that this tape idea works so well. I would be surprised if professional fabricators don't do this all the time, because that's absolutely the way to go. So I've got everything tacked up here, both sides, in 4 places, and I'm going to go ahead and take some more measurements, but I expect that everything's going to be fine now. Last time I checked it on the wheel, it was looking really good, and sat on the wheel perfectly nice. If you look straight down this, I don't know how well it shows up on the camera, but the lower portion on the right side kicks out to the right just a little bit, as does the one on the left. They both kick out to the right just a hair. So, but I don't think that it's really going to matter that much. It doesn't really show. Certainly not going to affect the strength of it. So, and otherwise everything's dialed in. So I'm just going to go ahead and if everything checks out okay, I'm going to go ahead and weld it. There is a possibility that maybe later on I'll heat it up with an acetylene torch and move it back over. But chances are I'm just going to leave it. So we had a bit of a mishap after I built the forks. I suppose by woodworking standards, this was really close. By metalworking standards, it wasn't. So our hole was off, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. I mean, it looks like it's more than that, but if you move it over 1/8 of an inch, it would be in the center of that black ring. So, so it was enough, because this wheel is such a large diameter, it was enough that that the wheel would rub intermittently on one side of the fork and then on the other. So what I've done is I filled all the holes with with an epoxy thickened with wood sawdust, and so now all my holes are filled. And then I've taken some steps to try to measure exactly. That ring is about the same distance from the bottom of the wheel all the way around, and then there's a dot in there that I'm thinking is the middle. So, but before I start cutting again, what I want to do is I'm going to take a measurement. So I've taken a shaft from a drive shaft from one of the junk rims and ground it to a point, and I've done that for for both sides. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mount these on the forks, and then that point is going to be sticking right in the center, and we'll do a real quick measurement to make sure that that is indeed the center. If it is, then the wheel will run true inside the fork as we push it down the road. And if it's not, then we'll probably have another problem. So, but that's the plan for now. Let's see how that works. So I've got my forks mounted on the wheel, and the wheel's got a little bit of wobble, and there's not quite enough clearance here. As it sits right now, it's working just fine. The wheel makes full revolution without rubbing on the inside of the fork. I could either trim the tire back, which is probably something I should do anyway, or another thing which I may do anyway is bend these forks out a little bit, and maybe down here bend them back in. So I'm not quite sure yet. We'll see how things progress, but looks like we've got some initial success here. To make the frame of the bike, I looked for some different pieces of steel, and I came across this old lamp post. When the lamp burned up, I thought the steel looked pretty nice, so I went ahead and saved it. It had 3 kind of gold sections here, and those are just aluminum, had no strength. But I went ahead and welded this together as a single piece of pipe, and it seems to be plenty strong enough. So now we need to figure out how the heck we're going to get a bend in this. So in preparation for trying to bend this piece of pipe, I went ahead and filled it with sand and water. Water first and then sand to make sure that it got packed in there and that there were no spaces. The idea with that is that by filling with sand, then it'll prevent the pipe from kinking. So it's back to the drawing board. After I filled these with sand, packed it down really well, just kind of got it in between two fairly stationary objects and started to bend and snapped the pipe in half, and then, well, not in half, but a third. Then I tried again with the other part, and same result. So the good news is the pipe didn't snap at my weld. You know, the end of the pipe is threaded here, so that's where it snapped. But the bad news is it doesn't look like I got any bend on that pipe at all. So I think that I need to try a different plan. But we're going to go ahead and get started off by, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the portion of this pipe that's threaded on the inside, shorten it up a little bit, and then re-weld it together, and try to figure out a different way to go ahead and make this a bent pipe. So I got the threaded portions out of this pipe, welded it back together. I haven't taken the time to sand the welds flush yet, because I think the way that I'm going to try to get the bend in the pipe, I've tried to look for different things, is I'm going to go ahead and put a cut in it, you know, every few inches or so, and then bend the pipe a little bit and weld it back together. And we don't need that much of a bend. That wheel's pretty big, and so we do need some radius, but not a lot. But I think I'm going to give it a try with this and see how that goes. So I gone ahead and marked off with the tape once every 6 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and make my slices and then try to bend the tube. 6 inches is totally arbitrary. I may need more. So I've made my slices and then put a bend on this just so that they're starting to touch. And I'd like to get a little more radius on it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut where they're touching so I can try to put a little bit more bend on it. So after several bend and cutaway and bend and cutaway iterations, I think I got the bend on this tube that I'd like. So it's not quite the same radius as the wheel, but still I think that's about where I'm going to want it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a tack on the inside of each one of these spots that I cut. But just to make sure that those tacks stay as close as possible, I put a ratchet strap across the top. I tacked up all the cuts and I double checked my arc to make sure it was what I want. Might be actually a little bit too tight, but I think I'm going to go ahead and weld this up and see how it all fits. So I completed all the welds, little pie notches I took out of this tube. Went ahead and brushed off. The wire brushed the burnt paint a little bit too close to my welds and it got really hot, and put a coat of paint on it just to kind of protect from rust. So kind of happy with how this came out. So it is a little bit notchy. It's not a smooth arc, but I think it's going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can get this on like a belt sander or some type of similar thing to get the weld smooth on the sides and top, maybe on the bottom as well. But a little less concerned about that, a little more worried about the geometry that this is going to give the bike. So I've knocked the high spots off my welds along the sides and then also along the top with a grinder, and on the other side I've already started to smooth it out with the sander, just taking longer strokes and so forth. So got it pretty good, but I did have a couple spots here where the kink was enough that I just went through the metal. So I'll go ahead and fill that with weld in a little while, and I just want this tube to look reasonable, not flawless, but reasonable anyway. So Probably not going to worry too much about the weld along the inside here. I may knock it down a little bit, but I'm certainly not going to go for the same smooth finish that I am along the sides and top, where it's going to be a lot more visible. Well, I got my welds ground down a lot smoother anyway, and got those holes filled, and that weld ground back down. So the tube isn't perfect, not by a long shot, but I suppose that probably needed a project for the future. So after the bike is up and running and we're using it, then I'm sure I'll be wanting to get into it and get things improved. I'm thinking that that's the configuration that I'm going to want the bike. There's just a little bit of rake on that front fork, which is not truly penny farthing. It should be up, straight up and down, but I think I'd like to have just a little bit of angle on it. And then the back wheel will be about there. I believe that's a back wheel from a wheelchair. Not certain, however. So with that information, we are going to take the backbone of the frame and figure out how we can get that connected up there. So as I look at different configurations and angles here, I'm trying to make the the backbone of the frame look good, against the wheel here. And what's going to look the best is if it comes here at a 90-degree angle. In other words, I'm not going to want it tilted up or down. It really starts to look pretty weird that way, and that makes the next step a lot easier. So I'll just be using this hole saw to notch the tube. In other words, we're going to go ahead and cut this in such a way that it's going to match up to the headstock that was originally with this bike. So, well, it wasn't easy. I guess this hole saw wasn't meant for going through steel, but I finally made it through. So I've got my headstock welded to the top of my frame, and this bottom one is I'd like to have a piece of tube going from the headstock to about where the seat's going to be, but since I'm not exactly sure where that is yet, it's going to be left blank for now. So I'm going to go ahead and get a coat of paint on this and mount this to the front wheel. Okie dokie, one step closer. I got the handlebars mounted in penny farthing style, and got that frame done. So now we need to get some connecting stuff here for the rear wheel. To make the rear fork, I'm going to use this back section here from this full suspension bicycle. So they claim it's aluminum, and the front section is aluminum, the back section is steel. So I got this piece pulled off. Still need to take the brakes off here, and I think I'm going to use just the top section here. I think that's the plan for now. So I'll go ahead and cut the rest of this off, and then we'll see about how to get this welded to the rest of the frame. So I got this portion of the fork cut off, and then also went ahead and cut off these, I guess it would be called dropouts. Not exactly sure. And the reason is that I didn't want a bunch of sharp edges here, but on the other hand, we've got this big piece cut out, I guess for lightning or styling or whatever. So the plan is I'll go ahead and weld these together there. That'll make this drop out a little stronger, and then I can kind of shape it after it's welded. So that's the plan for now. I guess the next step is we need to straighten these pipes out. These it's way too wide here between these. It's way too wide for that wheel. So if I straighten these pipes out, then I think it should be about right. So this wheel, which I think came off a wheelchair, it's got some nice bearings in here, but it's going to need an axle. So I got this hub that came off of one of the wheel projects. I'll just take that apart and use that one. So as it turns out, this axle is a little bit sloppy in here, but it's going to work out just fine because this bearing cone fits in there perfectly and will keep that centered. So just stick that together and tighten the jam nut on there, and I think we've got a working solution. So I straightened out these legs. So the wheel rides in there nice and true, and I went ahead and ground off what they call braze-ons typically, for the for the cable, for the derailleur and the brake. And I'd hit it with the acetylene torch and I couldn't get them to budge, but I do see a little gold there for braze. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. I couldn't get them to come off, but it does look like they're actually brazed on. So I've got my dropouts beefed up with those other pieces. Went ahead and welded all the way around, so it's a single piece, and also went ahead and fixed these spots over here where it got in there a little bit too much. Went ahead and filled that up with some weld. Got some small cracks in there, but I think it'll be fine like that. So anyway, I got a coat of paint on here and mounted on the wheel, and then it's just a matter of joining the two wheels to get this frame rolling. I think that the spacing between the front wheel and the back wheel here is about what I'd like to have. Maybe that back wheel needs to come forward a little bit, but not too much. If I take this old piece of bike and chop it here and here, that 1-inch pipe with the about a 60-degree bend in it will work nicely in there, especially if I extend it some and also maybe increase the angle on that fork a little bit. So I made a crude tracing of the bottom of this pipe on this piece of paper, and the idea is here that by rotating the paper around the pipe at different spots, I'll see where the proper place is to cut it so that it matches up with where I want to have this tube lining up. So it looks like if I cut this weld and flip the bottom half of this pipe 180 degrees, I think should line up pretty well. It's a good thing I tried that, because I would have expected I would have had to cut much higher. I was originally thinking way up here, so it's a good thing I actually took the measurement. But first, I'm going to go ahead, get these pieces cleaned up, and then I'm going to weld this silver pipe to the top of this fork. So I've got my back fork welded up, and need to do the tube. And eventually, I think what's going to happen before the frame's complete is we're going to go from this corner down to here somewhere with another piece of tube, just for strength. But I think it'll look better too. So I cut and flipped around that piece of tubing, and I think I have about the geometry I want here. So I cut it right here, and so now the bottom piece bends away rather than towards the wheel. As I checked my geometry and decided that I wanted about 4 inches from this hip to the end of the tube. So I went ahead and cut. There's a little piece of threaded end here. Cut that off, and what it ended up turning out I needed to do is this tube is 1.25 diameter, and this is like 1.48 or 1.47 in odd diameter. So I collapsed a bit of the tube that I cut off here, and so at this point right here, there's 3 layers of tube. There's some of this tube, some of this tube, and then this piece collapsed. It's all welded together, so I think that'll be pretty strong actually. I'm going to go ahead and put this back together and then see where we stand as far as the strength of this and what we're going to need to buttress it up. Now that I have the bike back together and the frame's all welded up, it's pretty clear that at the top it follows the wheel pretty well, but at the bottom it kicks out at a funny angle, and this is the offending joint here. So it looks like I'm going to have to cut it and re-weld that joint. So I have this fixtured on a piece of 2x8 here, and I got everything pretty close here. I was finding much better luck by having way less than a material thickness here, but I think that you know, if I try to like grind it too much to try to get my material thickness down or my fit better, then I might lose my alignment. So trying to draw a balance here. My alignment marks are matching up as close as I can see. So I've got my piece tacked up here. Unfortunately, I got it hot enough that all my indicating marks are no longer visible. So anyway, I guess I'll have to hope that that I did have it lined up properly, and I'll go ahead and finish this weld and see how everything fits. So I'm all welded back together. Get a coat of paint on this, put the bike together, and see how everything lines up. Well, the back wheel lines up with the front one now, so it looks like my weld was good. Well, we got the frame, basically the geometry set, but this video is starting to get pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. The original plan was to go ahead and make a video for the frame in entirety, and what still needs to happen is there needs to be a lot more support. As it sits right now, it's too fragile to actually carry me, so I'm going to be adding a lot of support, and we'll get that done in the next video, as well as getting the seat on. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. I'd certainly appreciate it. Any thoughts or suggestions, also please be sure to leave those below. Thanks. Have a great day.